Welcome to the basics of GraphQL in 8 minutes. We'll cover some of the foundation of GraphQL for anyone who hasn't tried it out before. If you want something more advanced, you'll have to watch GraphQL in 80 minutes, which is pending. I still haven't done that, so you can't watch it, I guess. But let's just jump into it. So GraphQL, it's a query language for your API. The gist of it is that you describe your data or your API, what the various objects look like, then you query it, and then you get back exactly what you want and exactly what you expect. So where exactly does GraphQL fit in? It would typically replace RESTful APIs, or really any sort of API. It doesn't have to be RESTful. It's just a way of communicating between server and client in a structured way. The basic architecture is that you have a server, a GraphQL server, and there's lots of different language implementations. It doesn't have to be JavaScript or Golang, it can be any one of them. Your server will handle queries and the mutations, and it has a schema that you define, and then the client queries and mutates against that. There are lots of different clients in different languages as well, and they don't have to be the same across the server and the client. They can be different. The client will send queries and mutations to the server, and it can't be from anywhere. It can be from the web, which is very common, or it could be in a mobile app, desktop application, even another server for server-to-server communication. Doesn't really matter. Let's just jump into the technical details if you're ready. So let's go over some of the types. The most common type is the object type, which will have various subfields. So this type is called character. And it has two subfields. One of them is called name, as you can see there, and the type of name is string. String is a scalar type, and you can tell if a type is a scalar type if it doesn't have any subfields. For example, you cannot query anything more from a string. It just is a string. And there's 5 built-in scalar types. You have int, you have float, a decimal number, string, a string, boolean, true or false, id, also usually a string, but it's more meant for identifying objects, and it's a separate type because it's not meant to be human readable. And you can create custom scalars in your application for whatever use cases you have. Then you have this little guy here, this exclamation mark. That's called the type modifier. So fields in GraphQL, they are nullable by default, so they may come back as null. If you put on an exclamation mark, then you're indicating it can't be null, and it's guaranteed to be there if you query it. Then you have these guys, the square brackets. That's a list or an array. And there's a couple different combinations of this list and exclamation mark that means a couple different things. So if you have just the square brackets, it's a list of episodes. The episode may be null and the list may be null. So there's no guarantee of anything being there, basically. Then you have a list of non-nullable episodes. So the list may be missing. So the list could be null. But if the list is there, every item in the list is not null. Next one is list of episodes. The list is not nullable. So the list will always be there, but any item in there may be null. And then both are non-nullable, so the list will be there, and if there are any items in that list, they will not be null. Next up we have enum, which is short for enumeration, because you have a finite amount of possible values, and in practice they're returned as a string. So if you queried a field with the type day, then you would get Monday, Tuesday, etc. One of those, and that's a guarantee. And they're really useful for day or like month of the year, you know, where there's only a few number of values that it may be. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at union types. So that's a type that may be one of another type, one of a couple different other types. So this one is called search result. And search result may either be a post, a user, or a group. And it makes sense to use it in this case because, you're doing a search and you're expecting a couple different objects back. You don't know exactly which is fine. So let's look at the query. So you search for something, And then we use these, which are called inline fragments. This is just telling GraphQL that, okay, so here's what I want you to do for the different types. So if it's a post, then I want the title. If it's a user, I want the name. And if it's a group, I want the name and the names of each member. And then to differentiate in the client which type each item in the search result is, then we query this called a meta field type name. And that will either be post, user, or group for each item depending on what it actually is. And that's how you would differentiate it in your client. Now let's move on to fragments. So we just talked about inline fragments. These are just normal fragments. Outline. No, that's not the real name. They're just fragments. And it's a way of reusing fields across queries and mutations. So if you have a set of common fields that you usually query a lot on a certain type, then you can bring it out into a fragment and then reuse it. So this fragment is called user info, and it applies to the user type. So if you have a query that returns a user, well, then you can use your fragment like this. Sorry, I went back accidentally. Then you use it like this. So you would destructure it with the 3 dots here. And this is just equivalent of doing this, typing out the fields manually. Let's move on to variables. So let's say you're looking up a product with a certain ID. Doing that here, you're saying it's 233 DF. Cool. But you probably want to be doing this dynamically depending on what page you're on or something. So we can make a change here to our query. So first we can update the query to accept a product ID variable. And then we also update the ID being equal to 233 to that variable. And then along with our query, we also send a list of variables for it to replace on the server. And those are variables. Next, let's move on to mutations. So mutations are basically the same as queries, except they mutate state. So there's a different keyword, it's mutation instead. And they will pretty much always have input, but it's not a requirement. And in this case, we're calling it a create review mutation. And they share the similarity with queries that you can query fields. You can ask for specific fields back. And the cool thing is, let's say you had a fragment on review that you always use to look up reviews. Well, you could use that same fragment here if create review returns the review type. So that's the power of queries, mutations, and fragments. I definitely wish it wasn't called a query because it's pretty hard for me to say, but that's just how it is. I love GraphQL anyway. And that's it. Let's look over what we looked over, okay? Together, you and me. So we looked at object types and scalar types. String, numbers, they're called ints in GraphQL. We looked at enums. Here's some moods: happy, content, dejected. How are you feeling? I'm happy, even though I'm kind of breaking my 8-minute rule. Anyways, we looked at unions, a type that could be one of other types, one of a number of other types. Fragments for reusing commonly used fields across queries and mutations, and variables. And yes, before you say anything, let me turn on my laser pointer. I have seen this capitalization error, but to level with you, this is like the 10th time I'm recording this and I'm not fixing it. So sorry, really sorry guys. And now finally, to really learn GraphQL, you need to try it out yourself. So go to this link, don't type it out by hand. I'll put it in the description. Most likely it's already there if you're watching it. Go there, try it out. This is an API for fantasy football. It's quite detailed. Lots of good fun and lots of stuff in there to explore, and put the stuff I've just explained to you to use. And then come back or something. So thank you for watching. Maybe one of these videos may be of interest to you. if there are any, unless I deleted every other video on my channel. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.